Welcome to the Environment Department's second public lecture for this year. I'd like to commence tonight by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and by paying our respects to elders both past and present. My name is Alexa Thompson, and along with Hannah McCrett, I am one of the Student Environment Officers this year at UMSU. The Environment Department aims to create an arena for students to become actively engaged in environmental issues and events. If any of you are interested in finding out more about the department, you can check us out on Facebook at the Environment Department UMSU, and we hold weekly meetings on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. But, more importantly, tonight we welcome former Australian Senator and Greens Party leader Bob Brown. We've invited Bob here this evening to speak on the topic of the environmental movement in politics. As a member of the first Greens Party in the world, the United Tasmania Group, an activist on countless environmental campaigns, and then a founder and leader of the Australian Greens Party, which was only established in 1992, a relatively short time ago. I'm sure Bob will have many reflections and insights on this particular topic. However, there are many parts of Bob's political journey which are less universally known, and which I'm sure will be of great interest to our audience of university students and others tonight. Bob grew up in a conservative family in rural New South Wales, where he says his love of the Australian bush was born. Out of school, he became a medical doctor, a far cry from environmental politics, and I think a message here that you shouldn't be afraid of career change. And Bob has struggled throughout his youth and adult life with his sexuality. Indeed, in Bob's first election campaign in 1982 in Tasmania, a series of advertisements attacking his sexuality saw Bob go from first in the polls to a devastating defeat. And I think that must have been a personally devastating blow too. 5 years later, at a big conference in Sydney in 1987, the initial effort to establish the Federal Greens Party was voted down by conference attendees from the Socialist Workers' Party. All these stories, I think, demonstrate the patience, persistence and passion that Bob has demonstrated throughout his life to make sure the environmental case is heard. And that is why we're so excited to welcome him here tonight. We will have a substantial period of Q&A after the lecture, and we are very much looking forward to taking audience questions. But now, none of you came here to listen to me speak, and so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Bob Brown.
Pick up, but we won't. Can you hear well enough?
Yep.
That's fine. I've got a boomer of a voice. And thanks, Alexa, and Hannah, and everybody for coming. This is quite lovely. Paul, partner Paul, who's over here in the green jumper, and I headed off to do a bit of grey nomading as of tomorrow. This is going to be 3 months in the western border country of Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland at Bush Heritage Properties. We're going to sleep out under the stars. We've got it all packed into one car and just be away from everything. That's the first time. We've been together now for nearly 20 years and this will be the biggest break we've had in that time. We've just been round to book publishers Hardy Grant, where I deposited a manuscript which Paul and I finished work on at 2 o'clock the morning before last, of anecdotes. And just saying to them that I haven't had time to read books while I was in the Senate either. Nor did I get to use computers. Fortunately, I had very good computer skilled people on staff while I was in the Senate for those 17 years. I did that quite deliberately because I could speed type before that. I wanted to think strategically and and I'm an information junkie. Walk into a library to look up something to do with Beethoven and I end up with my head in a book about pulsars. I knew that that getting into Google or whatever would be very diverting, and so I stayed away from it. And anyway, that's a book of 50 or 60 anecdotes, and that's what they are. I haven't written an autobiography because, to a degree, you know, autobiographies are a revisionist history. If you're going to tell everything, and nobody does that in an autobiography, I can assure you. So it's easier to have anecdotes, and that's coming out in August, and we're going to be tripping around with that. Why do that? Well, I was just saying to Lissa that I've got over my shyness. I'll be 70 at Christmas, and I've got over my shyness, which was a result of a very potent combination when I was your age, most of you I'm speaking to here, and that is I was a Presbyterian. For those of you who don't know, that's quite conservative, Christian, Protestant, and homosexual. And those two things don't mix really well together. In fact, as St. Paul said, and I quote the great saint of, well, I went to St. Paul's Sunday school in Armidale in New South Wales, and as St. Paul, the patron saint, said that men who lust after each other should be put to death. And when I did come out in 1976, right back then, I can tell you it was a very different world that we've got into now, because nobody spoke about it except in derisive and insulting terms. There was a 20-year jail sentence for being found in bed with another person of the same, well, if you're male, in bed with another person of the same sex. And it was a criminal offence just to exist as a practising homosexual. And very, as it is now in Iran, Uganda, and many other places around the world. And I've got a great empathy for those folk. But this came out of a strict reading of well, if you read St. Paul's letter to the Romans, from which, in the New Testament of the Bible, from which that quote I just gave you, and it's a much longer quote than that, comes, you'll see it's a flight of ideas by a pretty disorganised mind of a person who was far too sure of himself that he knew what was right when in fact he had no idea at all. He's also the fellow that said women should be seen and not heard, and shouldn't speak until their master tells them to. And you know, there's a whole slew of such extraordinarily bigoted ideas which have, through religious teaching down the centuries, caused enormous harm, with no escape in the lifetimes of many of the people who have been entrapped by that sort of thinking. Now, it's still alive and well, but we're in a modern democratic Australia, and it's a very, very different scene from even when I was a kid. And one of the great things, well, this little book I've got is called Optimism, which is a pretty daring option to come up with in 2014. But one of the things I've seen change on this planet, well, certainly in this country, has been that attitude towards homosexuality, which is so delightful now. Now, there's still people having a lot of trouble with it. Go Bush in Australia and Just See. But I can tell you that in my lifetime, since coming out, whereas for, as you alluded to, in the 80s, 70s and 80s, that led to never being able to walk up the street in Hobart or Devonport or Launceston without getting abused. You effing so-and-so. Just for your sexuality being known. And it was nasty abuse, and it was very often delivered with a threat. It's gone. Now what I get is people coming up and saying, oh, thank you, Bob, for being who you are. It's helped me with my own struggle with sexuality, or it's helped my partner, or it's, you know, it's good for my kid, or whatever. So I find that totally delightful, and that's a good thing that's changed in my lifetime. I had a great couple of parents. They were conservative, they were Liberal voters. My mum came off a dairy farm and my dad was a country policeman. And I have to thank him to the fact that I think I was arrested 8 or 10 times so far during environmental protests in Tasmania and Victoria and elsewhere, and jailed a number of times. And I have to thank him that I was a great jail survivor, because when I was 6 he locked me up in the cells at the back of the Trunkey Creek Police Station just south of Bathurst in New South Wales, because my mother had put out a very nice roast dinner until I discovered the spinach, and I wouldn't eat the stuff as a 6-year-old. So my father took me by the scruff of the neck and put me in the wooden cells up the back to think about this infraction of reasonableness. And I used to tell him, when he got very old, he's long since dead now, but he used to come down to Tassie and stay with me after my mother died, and I just say to him, "Dad, that was cruel and unusual punishment." And he'd say, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, when I got out of the cells, you made me eat the spinach, and by then it was cold." I found, by the way, being in jail, that the people who survived that the best were people who'd been to boarding school. It was a great preparation. So if you've been to boarding school, I have no doubt you're inherently less worried about jail than the rest of us. And by the time I was 16 or 17, was so caught up inside by this inability to talk with anybody about being gay, and the public pressure inherent of being in a situation like that. Boy, do I think about those, 2 young men hung in Iran earlier this year for being caught in bed together. And it is very difficult for those of us living in a comfortable, safe society to even get close to understanding what sort of a situation that is for those people. And I quote in this book, 1958, Launceston, Tasmania, a young fellow, then 21-year-old, saying, he said, "That's right," whereupon he was arrested and jailed for 3 years, just for that. And you can imagine what he copped in jail. So that doesn't happen anymore. It's gone. And it's a terrific thing that it has gone. Now, how did I get to... Well, I was about to say that I was so inherently strung up about this stuff back in the 60s in particular, that I had aversion therapy, which was electric shocks to the finger. They put up the doctors who were trying to find some way of curing being gay, because otherwise you face jail sentence and ostracising. And I've never felt bad about those doctors, and I went along voluntarily and I was a medical student at the time, and had to do this very quietly. After getting testosterone injections, they failed completely, and I didn't even get more hair on my chest, so I was very disappointed. Took all my pocket money, but it didn't work. And so went to get shock therapy. They put up a picture of a naked woman and a naked man. If it was a naked woman, it was fine, you could have a glass of water. If it was a naked man, you got an electric shock. This was meant to turn you off, you see, it was meant to rewire your brain. We now know better. And when you hear quackery, like comes out of Texas every now and then about they're going to cure people who are gay, it's codswallop. And I went to London because I was feeling suicidal and had actually sat on the edge of the lake at Lake Burley Griffin, where I was a graduate doctor, and decided about all one night thinking, will I swim out there, or one day I knew I could get halfway but I couldn't get across. And I had my family and friends and so on, and it was a terrific dilemma, and I was getting symptoms of, I heard somebody mention it on the radio yesterday, fulminant colitis, and for those medical students,